The shotgun blast made every head in the Prairie Dog Saloon snap to attention, but Rhett Evans held his ground, the smoking gun still clutched in his trembling hand as he pointed skyward. The patron's wide eyes glinted in the oil lamp light, cards forgotten, whiskey spilling. A few seasoned gamblers slowly reached for concealed weapons, while others froze mid-sip. "I said the pot is mine," Rhett growled through clenched teeth, his voice low but carrying across the suddenly silent saloon. His dark eyes never left the man across from him, a local cattle baron notorious for cheating at cards. Jasmine Lewis stood behind the bar, her knuckles white against the counter. She'd seen Rhett's temper flare before, but never like this, never with a shotgun. "Rhett," she said evenly, her voice cutting through the tension, "you're doing better than you think." It was their code, a simple phrase they'd established months ago when Rhett first rode into Cottonwood Springs with demons riding his back. The words settled over him like cool water on a brush fire. The barrel of his shotgun lowered fractionally. "Ain't no call for that, Evans," the cattle baron muttered, pushing back from the table. "Take the damn pot if you're so convinced." Cottonwood Springs, Wyoming Territory, 1878, was no place for the faint of heart. The railroad had arrived just 3 years prior, transforming what had been little more than a watering hole into a proper town, though proper was a generous description. Saloons outnumbered churches 5-1, and the undertaker maintained the busiest establishment in town. Rhett had ridden into Cottonwood Springs the previous winter, half frozen and wholly desperate. The war had ended 13 years ago, but some men never stopped fighting it. Rhett was one of them, a former Confederate scout who'd spent the years since wandering the frontier, taking odd jobs and drowning memories in whiskey and cards. "You'll take your winnings and leave, Mr. Evans," Sheriff Tom Marshall announced from the doorway, his hand resting casually on his holstered revolver. "And we'll forget this happened, provided you remember your manners from now on." Rhett's jaw worked silently, but he nodded, scooping coins and bills into his hat with his free hand, his shotgun never quite pointing at the floor. "I'll make sure he gets home safely, Sheriff," Jasmine said, already untying her apron. The sheriff's weathered face crinkled with concern. "That's not your job, Miss Lewis." "No, but it's my choice," she replied, stepping around the bar. At 26, Jasmine had learned that in a town like Cottonwood Springs, waiting for someone else to fix problems meant waiting forever. She'd been running the saloon since her uncle passed the previous year, turning what had been little more than a rough watering hole into something approaching respectability. Outside, the spring air carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Jasmine took Rhett's arm, guiding him away from the saloon before he could change his mind about leaving peacefully. "I had that handled," he muttered as they walked down the muddy street, clearly. Jasmine's tone was dry as desert dust. "Nothing says handled quite like shooting a hole through my ceiling. He was cheating. Probably. But you're alive, and that's more than can be said for the last man who accused Gilbert Preston of cheating." Rhett fell silent as they walked toward the small cabin he rented at the edge of town. The night was cool, stars pricking through the veil of clouds overhead. Their boots squelched in the mud, the spring thaw turning Cottonwood Springs streets into a quagmire that wouldn't dry until June. "You shouldn't be seen with me like this," he said finally, his voice softer. "People will talk." "People already talk," she replied. "I'm a woman running a saloon. According to half the town, I'm one step away from ruin already." They reached his cabin, a humble one-room affair that Rhett had fixed up with surprising skill since his arrival. A small garden was taking shape beside it, early spring greens poking through the soil. Inside, the cabin was neat, with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, and shelves of books that raised eyebrows in a town where literacy wasn't a common trait. Rhett set his shotgun by the door, then slumped into the single chair by the cold hearth. "I'm sorry about your ceiling. You'll fix it," Jasmine said matter-of-factly, kneeling to light the fire. "Tomorrow, when you're sober. I'm not drunk. No, just stupid." She glanced up at him, the kindling catching fire under her hands. "You know Preston has 3 men who ride with him if the sheriff hadn't shown up." "I know." Rhett ran a hand through his dark hair, shot through with premature silver at the temples. At 32, his face bore the weathering of a man a decade older. "I shouldn't have lost my temper." "No, you shouldn't have." The fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows across Jasmine's face. "But you're doing better than you think, Rhett. 6 months ago, you would have shot him, not the ceiling." It was true. When Rhett had first arrived in Cottonwood Springs, he'd been wild-eyed and reckless, picking fights and courting death. Something had changed since then. Something or someone. "Why do you bother with me, Jasmine?" he asked quietly. She sat back on her heels, the firelight highlighting the auburn in her dark hair. "Because underneath all that anger, there's a good man trying to find his way back." Their eyes held for a long moment before she stood and dusted off her skirts. "Get some sleep. I expect you at the saloon by noon to fix my ceiling." After she left, Rhett sat staring into the fire, turning his hat in his hands. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have cared if Preston's men had gunned him down. Now, he found himself wanting to see tomorrow, wanting to fix Jasmine's ceiling, tend his garden, maybe even start building something like a future. The realization terrified him more than any gunfight ever could. Morning arrived with the persistent crow of a rooster and sunlight filtering through Rhett's unshuttered window. His head pounded, though more from tension than whiskey. He'd been more careful with the bottle lately, another change he couldn't quite explain. By 11, he'd fed and watered his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Moses, and gathered tools for the ceiling repair. The streets were less muddy in the daylight, though puddles still reflected the clear blue sky. Cottonwood Springs buzzed with the activity of a spring morning, freight wagons unloading at the general store, women hanging laundry, children chasing each other between buildings. The Prairie Dog Saloon stood at the center of town, its weathered facade bearing a fresh coat of paint Jasmine's doing. She'd been making improvements since taking over, replacing broken windows, hiring a piano player 3 nights a week, and even installing proper glass oil lamps instead of the dangerous tallow candles her uncle had preferred. When Rhett entered carrying his toolbox, Jasmine was directing 2 young men in moving a new table into place. She glanced up, a hint of surprise crossing her face. "You're early," she said. "Figured I'd get a head start." He nodded toward the jagged hole in the ceiling. "Looks worse in daylight." "Most things do." She finished with the table movers before approaching him. "There's coffee in the back if you want some before you start." The back room of the saloon served as Jasmine's office and occasional living quarters, though she maintained a small house behind the building. The office was orderly, with ledgers neatly stacked and a pot of coffee warming on a small stove. Rhett poured himself a cup, noticing the correspondence spread across her desk, letters from suppliers, invoices, and what appeared to be a letter from back east. The return address caught his eye, Boston, Massachusetts. "Family?" he asked, nodding toward the letters. Jasmine hesitated before answering. "My sister. She keeps trying to convince me to sell this place and move to Boston. And you don't want to." "This was my uncle's dream," she said, straightening papers unnecessarily. "He built this place from nothing. Besides, what would I do in Boston? Pour tea and pretend to be interested in which society matron is wearing what to which ball?" Rhett allowed himself a small smile. "Hard to picture you doing that." Exactly. She met his eyes. Some of us belong where we are, even if others don't understand it. He wondered, not for the first time, about Jasmine's past. She spoke like someone educated, used words most saloon owners wouldn't know. There were rumors around town that she came from money back east, that she'd run away from a bad marriage, that she was hiding from something or someone. Rhett never asked. He had his own secrets after all. "I should get to that ceiling," he said after a moment. The repair took most of the day. Rhett had to remove damaged boards, cut new ones to size, and secure them properly. Throughout the day, the saloon gradually filled as its regular patrons drifted in. Most nodded respectfully to Jasmine, a few eyed Rhett with suspicion, and one or two made comments just loud enough for him to hear. Surprised she lets him back in after that display. Always knew Evans was trouble. Just a matter of time before he really hurts somebody. Rhett kept his focus on his work, though his jaw tightened at each murmured comment. By late afternoon, the repair was complete, and he was applying a coat of whitewash to blend the new wood with the old. "Looks good," Jasmine said, bringing him a glass of water. "Better than before, actually." "Had practice," he replied, accepting the water gratefully. "Fixed a lot of things over the years. Except yourself." The words were quiet, not meant to wound. Rhett paused, the whitewash brush dripping onto the canvas he'd spread beneath his ladder. "Some things stay broken. Only if you let them." She took the empty glass from him and turned to go, but he caught her wrist gently. "Jasmine." His voice was rough. "Thank you for last night, for—" He struggled to find the words. "For seeing something worth saving." Her expression softened. "Come to dinner tonight, my place not here." 7 o'clock. Before he could respond, she pulled away, returning to the bar where customers waited. Rhett watched her go, wondering when exactly Jasmine Lewis had become the axis around which his world turned. That evening, Rhett stood outside Jasmine's small house, a bunch of wildflowers in one hand, his hat in the other. He'd bathed in the creek, trimmed his beard, and put on his cleanest shirt. Still, he hesitated before knocking, suddenly aware of the gulf between them, not just their different stations in life, but the weight of his past against her hopeful present. When she opened the door, the sight of her stole his breath. Freed from the practical confines of running the saloon, Jasmine wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Her hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders instead of being pinned severely back. "I was beginning to think you weren't coming," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied, offering the wildflowers awkwardly. "These aren't much, but they're beautiful," she interrupted, taking them with a genuine smile. "Thank you." The inside of Jasmine's house revealed another side of her bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes of poetry, history, and mathematics. A small piano stood in one corner, sheet music open on its stand. The furnishings were simple but tasteful, nothing like the gaudy decorations some might expect from a saloon owner. Dinner was a savory stew with fresh bread, better fare than Rhett had eaten in months. They ate at a small table by the window, the conversation flowing more easily than either expected. Jasmine spoke of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her education at a women's seminary, and her decision to join her uncle in Wyoming after her parents' deaths. "My sister thinks I've lost my mind," she admitted, refilling Rhett's coffee cup. "Caroline married well, has 3 children and a house on Beacon Hill. She can't understand why I'd choose." She gestured broadly. "This." "And why did you?" he asked. Jasmine's smile turned reflective. "Freedom. Out here, I'm judged for what I do, not who my father was or how well I pour tea. I run my business, make my decisions. It's hard, but it's mine." She tilted her head. "What about you? What brought you to Cottonwood Springs?" Rhett studied his coffee. "Nowhere else to go," he said finally. Been drifting since the war. Worked cattle drives, scouted for the army a while, did some prospecting. Nothing stuck. And before the war, he hesitated. Few people asked about his past, and he rarely volunteered information. But Jasmine's eyes held no judgment, only curiosity. "Virginia," he said. "My family had a small farm near Fredericksburg. Nothing grand, just enough land to grow tobacco and raise a few horses. It's gone now, burned during the war, and your family, gone too." His voice was flat. "Father died at Antietam. Mother and sister died when Union forces came through our valley in '64. Jasmine reached across the table, her hand covering his. "I'm sorry. Long time ago." "Not so long," she said softly. "Not when you carry it with you every day." He met her eyes, surprised by how easily she saw through him. Some days are better than others. And today, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Today's one of the better ones. After dinner, they sat on Jasmine's small porch, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. Spring peepers sang from the creek that ran behind the houses, and the distant sounds of the saloon piano music and occasional laughter drifted on the cool evening air. "I should get back," Jasmine said eventually. "Danny's tending bar, but Saturday nights get busy." "I'll walk you," Rhett offered, rising from his chair. The walk to the saloon took only minutes, but they moved slowly, reluctant for the evening to end. At the back door, Jasmine paused. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said. "It's been a while since I had company that didn't involve business or town gossip." "Thank you for inviting me." Rhett shifted his weight, suddenly uncertain. "Jasmine, a crash from inside the saloon interrupted him, followed by raised voices and the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. "Damn it," Jasmine muttered, reaching for the door. Rhett caught her arm. "Let me go first." Inside, they found chaos. Two cowhands were locked in a brawl that had already demolished a table and several chairs. Danny, the young bartender, was trying unsuccessfully to separate them while other patrons either cheered or scrambled to get out of the way. Rhett moved quickly, grabbing one of the fighters by the collar and yanking him backward while Jasmine shouted for order. The second cowhand, seeing his opponent restrained, lunged forward only to find himself staring down the barrel of Rhett's revolver. "That's enough," Rhett said, his voice dangerously quiet. The room fell silent except for the heavy breathing of the two fighters. "Both of you are done for tonight," Jasmine announced, her authoritative tone a marked contrast to the woman who had shared dinner with him minutes before. "Pay for the damages and leave." "He started it," protested the man Rhett was restraining. "I don't care who started it," Jasmine replied. "You're finishing it elsewhere." After the troublemakers were escorted out and the broken furniture cleared away, the saloon gradually returned to its normal Saturday night rhythm. Rhett helped Danny sweep up broken glass while Jasmine tended bar, her earlier softness replaced by the confident efficiency that kept the prairie dog running smoothly. It was past midnight when the last customers departed, and Jasmine finally locked the doors. Rhett had stayed, helping where needed and keeping a watchful eye for further trouble. "You didn't have to stay," she said as she counted the night's earnings. "Wanted to make sure you were okay." She looked up, fatigue evident in her face. "It's not the first fight and won't be the last. Part of running a saloon. Still," he leaned against the bar, "thank you again for dinner." A smile touched her lips. "We never finished our conversation." "No," he agreed. "We didn't." Something unspoken hung between them, a current neither was quite ready to acknowledge. "Tomorrow's Sunday," Jasmine said, returning to her counting. "Saloon's closed. I usually take Moses for a ride up to the bluffs, take a book, spend the day away from town." Rhett recognized the invitation in her words. "Sounds nice." "It is." She glanced up at him, a question in her eyes. "What time do you usually head out?" he asked, after church lets out, around 11. I'll bring lunch, he offered. Her smile warmed him more than the spring sunshine ever could. I'd like that. Sunday dawned clear and mild, the kind of perfect spring day that made even Cottonwood Springs look almost picturesque. Rhett woke early, tended his garden, and then spent an hour preparing food for the promised lunch: bread, cheese, dried apple slices, and strips of jerky he'd made himself from last fall's deer. At 11, he waited at the edge of town with Moses saddled and ready. Jasmine appeared precisely on time, riding side saddle on a dappled gray mare, wearing a divided riding skirt that raised eyebrows in town, but allowed her to ride comfortably. A few churchgoers stared as she passed, their Sunday propriety offended by the sight of a woman in such attire, riding alone to meet a man of Rhett's reputation. Scandalized the congregation again? Rhett asked as she approached. They're disappointed I didn't attend services, she replied with a mischievous smile. Reverend Williams has been praying for my soul since I took over the saloon, and here you are making his job harder. He enjoys the challenge. She nodded toward the hills rising west of town. Shall we? They rode side by side when the trail allowed, talking easily about inconsequential things: the weather, the spring planting, the new shipment of goods expected on Tuesday's train. Away from town, Jasmine seemed lighter, less guarded. She pointed out wildflowers and bird nests, showed him where deer had recently passed, all with the keen eye of someone who truly saw the world around her. The bluffs overlooking Cottonwood Springs offered a spectacular view. The town below looked almost toy-like, with the silver thread of the railroad cutting through the landscape. Beyond stretched the vast Wyoming prairie, dotted with small homesteads and cattle herds, rolling all the way to the distant mountains. They picnicked in the shade of a lone cottonwood tree, spreading a blanket on new spring grass. Jasmine had brought a book of poetry, Whitman's Leaves of Grass, and read aloud while they ate, her voice giving life to words about the open road and the beauty of the American landscape. You read beautifully, Rhett commented when she paused. My father insisted on elocution lessons, she said, marking her place with a ribbon. He believed a woman should be accomplished in the arts, even if she never used them beyond the drawing room. He'd be surprised to see you now, horrified more likely. She set the book aside. What about your parents? What did they want for you? Rhett leaned back against the tree trunk. My father wanted me to take over the farm, marry the daughter of the neighboring farmer, raise tobacco and children. He picked a blade of grass, twisting it between his fingers. Simple plans. And what did you want? The question caught him off guard. Few people had ever asked what he wanted. I wanted to see what was beyond Virginia, he said slowly. I read books about the West, about California and the territories. I wanted. He trailed off, unsure how to explain the restlessness that had defined his youth. Adventure, Jasmine supplied, something beyond what was expected. Yes, he glanced at her. Like you, like me, she agreed, meeting his eyes, though I suspect we've both found more than we bargained for. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Rhett found himself leaning forward, drawn by something he couldn't name. Jasmine didn't pull away, her eyes holding his, unafraid. The distant crack of a rifle shattered the moment. Both tensed, instinctively scanning the landscape. Another shot rang out, then a third, coming from the direction of a small homestead visible about a mile away. The Hanson place, Jasmine said, already on her feet. Something's wrong. Rhett was up just as quickly, gathering their things. Could be nothing, target practice. On a Sunday. And that many shots? She shook her head, already moving toward the horses. The Hansons have been having trouble with rustlers. They rode hard toward the homestead, dust rising behind them. As they crested a small rise, they saw smoke rising from the direction of the Hanson barn. "Damn it," Rhett muttered, spurring Moses faster. The scene that greeted them was grim. The barn was fully ablaze, flames reaching toward the clear spring sky. A man lay motionless in the yard, Sven Hansen, the homesteader. Near the house, his wife Ingrid knelt over their teenage son, pressing a cloth to his bleeding shoulder. Jasmine dismounted before her horse had fully stopped, rushing to Ingrid's side. "What happened?" "Rustlers," Ingrid said, her accent thick with emotion. "4 men. They took our cattle, shot Eric when he tried to stop them, shot Sven when he ran from the house." Tears streaked her dirt-smudged face. Rhett had gone to check on Sven. "He's alive," he called, "but he's been hit bad." "The rustlers?" Jasmine asked Ingrid. "Headed north toward the pass," the woman replied. "Not more than 10 minutes ago." Rhett's face hardened. "I know that pass. There's only one way through." Jasmine looked up at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Rhett, no, wait for the sheriff. Sheriff's in town. By the time he gets here, those men will be gone." He checked his revolver, then the rifle in his saddle scabbard. "Stay with them. Get Sven inside if you can. I'll be back." "Rhett, I'll be careful," he promised, already mounting Moses. 4 against 1 isn't the worst odds I've faced." Before she could protest further, he was gone, Moses's hooves throwing dirt as they galloped north. Jasmine watched him go, fear and something else tightening her chest. With Ingrid's help, she managed to get Sven inside the house and onto a bed. The bullet had gone through his thigh, missing the bone but leaving an ugly wound that bled profusely. Eric's injury was less severe, a graze across his upper arm that looked worse than it was. As she cleaned and bandaged their wounds, Jasmine's thoughts remained with Rhett. She had seen the look in his eyes, not just determination, but a dangerous recklessness she thought he'd begun to overcome. The same look he'd had that night at the poker table, but colder, more focused. "Your man is brave," Ingrid said, misreading Jasmine's concern. "But those rustlers, they are killers." "He's not my man," Jasmine replied automatically, "and he knows what he's doing." But did he? Rhett had been a soldier, a scout, probably even a gunfighter at times during his wandering years. But he'd also been carrying a burden of guilt and anger that made him take risks no sane man would consider. If he caught up to the rustlers? She pushed the thought away, focusing on her work. Sven needed stitches, which she provided with the steady hand of someone who had patched up her share of barroom injuries. Eric's wound she cleaned thoroughly before wrapping it in clean bandages from Ingrid's meager medical supplies. "Someone should ride for the doctor," she said when she'd finished. "I will go," Ingrid decided. "Eric can stay with his father. She hesitated. "Perhaps you should wait for your friend." Jasmine nodded, understanding the unspoken concern. If Rhett returned injured, or if he didn't return at all, someone should be there. After Ingrid left, Jasmine busied herself cleaning up the bloody cloths and water, checking on Sven periodically as he drifted in and out of consciousness. Eric sat beside his father, his young face solemn. "Those men," he said suddenly. "They laughed when they shot Pa, like it was nothing." Jasmine placed a gentle hand on his uninjured shoulder. "Try not to think about it now." "Will your friend catch them?" "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I hope he kills them all," Eric said fiercely. Jasmine didn't respond. Part of her shared the boy's sentiment. Men who would shoot a farmer and his son, burn their barn, and steal their livelihood deserved whatever fate befell them. But another part feared what such violence would do to Rhett, who had finally seemed to be finding peace. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Sven's condition stabilized, his color improving slightly. Eric eventually succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep in his chair. Jasmine kept watch at the window, scanning the horizon for riders. The sun was low when she finally spotted a lone figure approaching. Her heart leaped to her throat as she recognized Moses's distinctive gait, with Rhett slumped slightly in the saddle. She ran outside, fear propelling her across the yard. As Rhett drew closer, she could see blood on his shirt, a darkening stain spreading across his left side. "Rhett," he reined Moses to a stop, his face pale beneath the tan. "They won't be taking anyone else's cattle," he said, his voice strained. "You're hurt. Not as bad as it looks." He dismounted carefully, wincing as his boots hit the ground. "Bullet grazed my ribs. Hurts like hell, but I'll live." Behind him, she noticed for the first time the small herd of cattle plodding along, apparently following Moses of their own accord. "You got the cattle back," she said, amazed. Seemed ashamed to leave them. He attempted a smile that turned into a grimace. "The rustlers won't need them where they're going. All of them, 3. His eyes darkened. "One got away. Took a bullet in the shoulder, though. He won't get far." Jasmine helped him into the house, settling him at the kitchen table while she gathered clean water and bandages. Eric woke at their entrance, his eyes widening at the sight of Rhett's bloodied shirt. "You got them?" he asked eagerly. "Most of them," Rhett confirmed. "Your cattle are outside." The boy's face lit up. "Pa's going to be okay, too. Miss Lewis fixed him up good." Jasmine gently cut away Rhett's shirt, revealing an angry furrow across his ribs where the bullet had scored the flesh. It was bleeding steadily but wasn't deep enough to be life-threatening. "You were lucky," she said quietly as she cleaned the wound. "Usually am," he replied, watching her work. "Except at cards." She didn't smile at his attempt at humor. This could have gone very differently. But it didn't. This time, she met his eyes. "Next time you might not come back." Understanding dawned in his expression. "You were worried about me." "Of course I was worried," she snapped, pressing a bandage perhaps more firmly than necessary against his side. "You rode off alone after 4 armed men who had already shot 2 people. What did you expect me to feel?" He captured her hand in his, stilling her movements. "I came back, Jasmine. I always planned to come back." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. For a moment, the room around them seemed to fade away. There was only Rhett, his hand warm around hers, his eyes saying what his words could not. The sound of approaching horses broke the spell. Eric ran to the window, then announced, "It's Ma with the doctor and the sheriff." The next hours passed in a flurry of activity. Dr. Wilson examined Sven, pronounced Jasmine's stitching tolerable, and rebandaged both Hanson's wounds. Sheriff Marshall took Rhett's statement about the rustlers, frowning at the news that one had escaped. "I'll send a deputy to collect the bodies," he said. "And we'll keep an eye out for the 4th man. You're sure you wounded him?" "Left shoulder," Rhett confirmed. "He was bleeding heavy." The sheriff nodded, then turned to Jasmine. "Miss Lewis, I don't suppose I could convince you to return to town tonight. It's getting late, and after what's happened." "I'll see her home safely," Rhett interrupted. The sheriff's frown deepened. "With all due respect, Evans, you're in no condition to protect anyone right now." "I'll be fine," Jasmine assured the lawman. "We'll leave shortly, while there's still some light." After the sheriff departed, Dr. Wilson finished treating Rhett's injury, declaring him lucky and prescribing rest, advice the doctor clearly expected to be ignored. "At least try not to get shot again for a week or 2, Wilson said dryly. "Give this one time to heal." By the time they finally left the Hanson farm, the sun was setting, painting the prairie in gold and crimson. They rode slowly, mindful of Rhett's injury and the gathering darkness. "You didn't have to stay," Rhett said after they had ridden in silence for some time. "Yes, I did." Jasmine glanced over at him. "Someone had to make sure you didn't do anything else foolish." "Foolish. I brought their cattle back." "And nearly got yourself killed in the process." she sighed. Rhett, what were you thinking, going after those men alone? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low and serious. I was thinking that someone had to stop them, that the Hansons didn't deserve what happened to them, that. He paused. That maybe doing something right might balance some of the wrong I've done. Is that what this is about? Redemption? Jasmine's voice softened. Rhett, you can't erase the past with grand gestures. That's not how healing works. Then how does it work? The question sounded genuine, almost desperate. One day at a time, she said. By building something new instead of trying to fix what's broken. By allowing yourself to move forward instead of constantly looking back. They rode in silence as darkness settled fully around them. Stars emerged overhead, brilliantly clear in the vast Wyoming sky. Cottonwood Springs glowed in the distance, lamplight marking the town's boundaries against the encroaching night. When I was in that pass, Rhett said suddenly, facing those men, I didn't think about dying. For the first time in years, I was afraid to die, afraid I wouldn't come back. His voice dropped lower, afraid I wouldn't see you again. Jasmine's heart quickened. Rhett, I know I have no right, he continued. You're everything good and decent in this town. I'm just a broken-down ex-soldier with more ghosts than future. But being around you makes me want to be better, makes me think maybe I could be. They had reached the edge of town, where they would normally part ways. Jasmine to her house behind the saloon, Rhett to his cabin on the outskirts. It's late, she said softly. You shouldn't be alone with that injury. Come home with me. His eyes widened slightly. Jasmine, your reputation hang my reputation, she interrupted. I care about you, Rhett Evans. I'm not going to let you bleed to death in your cabin because I'm worried what the church ladies might think. At her house, Jasmine lit lamps and built up the fire while Rhett eased himself into a chair, clearly in more pain than he wanted to admit. The day's events had taken their toll on both of them, exhaustion settling deep in their bones. Let me check your bandage, Jasmine said, bringing a basin of water to his side. As she carefully peeled back the edge of the dressing, Rhett's hand came up to cover hers. Jasmine, he said softly. Thank you. For what? For believing I could be more than what I was. For seeing something in me worth saving when I couldn't see it myself. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a barrier falling away, a truth finally acknowledged. Rhett's hand moved to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. I think I've been falling in love with you since the day you told me my coffee was terrible and I should learn to make it properly, he murmured. A smile curved her lips. It was terrible. It still is. I'll work on it, he promised, leaning closer. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question asked and answered in the soft press of lips. When they parted, Jasmine remained close, her forehead resting against his. Stay with me, she whispered. Not just tonight, stay in Cottonwood Springs. Build something here with me. What about the town gossips? The respectable folk who think you deserve better, let them talk, she said fiercely. I know what I want, Rhett Evans. I want you with all your scars and ghosts. I want to build something that's ours. He kissed her again, deeper this time, as if sealing a promise. I'm not an easy man to love. I'm not looking for easy, she replied. I'm looking for real. That night, Jasmine tended Rhett's wound, made him comfortable on her small sofa, and retired to her own bed. But something had fundamentally changed between them, a door opened that couldn't be closed again. The following weeks brought rapid changes to both their lives. Rhett recovered from his injury and began dividing his time between his garden, odd jobs around town, and helping at the saloon. Jasmine introduced him officially as her new business partner, a move that raised eyebrows but was accepted when it became clear the arrangement benefited the establishment. The fourth rustler was eventually caught trying to steal horses from a ranch near Laramie. He still bore the bullet wound Rhett had given him and, faced with hanging, confessed to a string of thefts and murders across 3 territories. The Hansons recovered from their injuries, and with their cattle returned, salvaged what might have been a ruinous season. Spring gave way to summer, and Cottonwood Springs settled into its usual rhythms. The railroad brought new people, new goods, and new opportunities. Rhett's small garden flourished, providing vegetables for the saloon's increasingly popular midday meals. One evening in late July, Rhett and Jasmine sat on the porch of what was now their shared home, watching fireflies rise from the grass as darkness gathered. "I got a letter from Caroline today," Jasmine said, sipping lemonade sweetened with honey from a nearby farm. "Still trying to convince you to move to Boston?" Rhett asked. "Actually, no," Jasmine smiled. "She wants to visit, says she's curious about this wild frontier town and the man who's apparently tamed my independent spirit." Rhett laughed. "Tamed you," her words, not mine. She set her glass down. "Would you mind if she came to stay?" "It's your house too," he reminded her, "and I'd like to meet the woman who thinks anyone could tame you." Jasmine's expression turned thoughtful. "I've been thinking, Rhett, about the future." "What about it?" "The saloon is doing well. Better than ever, really. With the new railroad spur coming through next spring, the town's only going to grow." He nodded, wondering where she was leading. "Good for business." "Yes, but—" She hesitated. "I was thinking maybe we could expand. Not just the saloon, but other ventures." "What kind of ventures?" "I've been talking with Mr. Simmons at the bank. The old McDermott place is for sale, 500 acres just north of town. Good water, decent grazing land." Rhett stared at her. "You want to buy a ranch?" "I want us to buy a ranch," she corrected. "Keep the saloon running, but build something else too, something that could grow with us." The implication of her words wasn't lost on him. "With us," he repeated softly. "I love you, Rhett," she said simply. "I want a life with you. Not just now, but for years to come. I want to build something that lasts." He reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "I never thought I'd have a future again. After the war, after losing everything, I just existed, day to day, place to place." His voice roughened with emotion. "Then I found you, and suddenly there was tomorrow and next week and next year." "Is that a yes?" she asked, a smile playing at her lips. "It's a yes," he confirmed. "To the ranch, to the future, to everything with you, Jasmine Lewis." The kiss they shared was sweet with promise, with dreams finally within reach. When they parted, Rhett kept hold of her hand. "There's something else," he said. "Something I've been meaning to ask." From his pocket, he withdrew a small object that caught the last light of day, a ring, simple but elegant, a single pearl set in gold. "It was my mother's," he explained. "The only thing I have left of her. I've carried it all these years, never knowing why I kept it." He met Jasmine's wide eyes. "Now I know. I was waiting to give it to you. Rhett, marry me," he said. "Not because of the ranch or the saloon or what people might think. Marry me because I love you and I want to spend whatever years I have left building a life with you." Tears shimmered in Jasmine's eyes as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." The ring slipped onto her finger as if it had been made for her. Rhett pulled her close, marveling at how completely his life had changed, how he had changed since that night he'd lost his temper at the poker table, and she'd told him he was doing better than he thought. She had been right, as she so often was. He was doing better. They both were together. The wedding took place that September, as golden aspens dotted the hillsides and the first crisp hint of autumn touched the air. It was a small ceremony by Eastern standards, but large by Cottonwood Springs measure. The entire town turned out. even those who had once whispered about the impropriety of a saloon owner and a former Confederate. Caroline arrived from Boston a week before the wedding, a proper city woman whose initial shock at Wyoming Territory's roughness gradually gave way to a reluctant appreciation for her sister's chosen home. She brought wedding gifts from relatives Jasmine hadn't seen in years and, more surprisingly, their approval. Mother would have liked him, Caroline confided to Jasmine the night before the wedding as they sat in Jasmine's bedroom. Father, too, I think, once he got past the southern accent. Really? Jasmine asked, surprised by her sister's assessment. He looks at you like you're the only person in the world, Caroline said simply. Like you're his compass. That's rare, Jasmine, in any society. The wedding itself was held in the newly completed church, Reverend Williams officiating with a mixture of solemnity and genuine pleasure. Jasmine wore a gown of ivory silk that Caroline had insisted on bringing from Boston, while Rhett wore a new suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. When they exchanged vows, Rhett's voice was steady, his eyes never leaving Jasmine's face. The words were traditional, but the emotion behind them transformed the simple phrases into something profound, a promise not just of fidelity, but of healing, of building something new from the ashes of the past. The celebration afterward spilled from the church to the saloon, which had been decorated with wildflowers and ribbons for the occasion. The piano player performed his entire repertoire twice. Children danced alongside their parents, and for one afternoon, the divisions that typically separated the townspeople dissolved in shared joy. As the party continued into evening, Rhett found himself momentarily alone, watching Jasmine across the room as she laughed with friends. Sheriff Marshall appeared at his side, offering a glass of whiskey. "Never thought I'd see the day," the lawman said, nodding toward Jasmine. "She always swore she'd never marry." "I'm a lucky man," Rhett acknowledged, accepting the drink. "Yes, you are." Marshall studied him thoughtfully. "You know, when you first rode into town, I had you pegged as trouble. Figured you'd either end up shot or hanging from my gallows within 6 months." Rhett smiled slightly. "I probably would have if not for her." "She's good for you," Marshall agreed. "And you're good for her, though I wouldn't have believed it a year ago. She needs someone who sees her for who she is, not what people expect her to be." "I'll do right by her," Rhett promised. "I know you will." The sheriff raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings." Later, as moonlight silvered the path to their home, Rhett carried Jasmine across the threshold, her laughter warming the night air. Inside, candles had been lit, casting a soft glow over what was now truly their shared home. "Mrs. Evans," he said softly, setting her on her feet but keeping his arms around her waist. "I like the sound of that," she replied, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "Though I'm keeping Lewis for the saloon. Jasmine Lewis has a reputation to maintain." "A fearsome reputation," he agreed with a smile. "One I've worked hard to build," she said, more seriously. "It matters to me, Rhett, having my own place, my own name in the business." "I would never ask you to give that up," he assured her. "It's part of who you are, part of why I love you." Her eyes softened. "And the ranch will be Evans' land," he said. "Where we'll build our home, raise horses, maybe even—" He hesitated. "Children," she finished for him. He nodded. "If you want that." "I do," she said simply. "With you." That night, as they came together as husband and wife, the ghosts that had haunted Rhett for so long seemed finally to retreat. In Jasmine's arms, he found not just passion but a sense of belonging he had thought forever lost to him. This was home, not a place, but a person. A future. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The ranch they purchased flourished under their care, with Rhett discovering a talent for breeding horses that soon became sought after throughout the territory. The saloon continued to prosper as Cottonwood Springs grew from a rough frontier town into a proper community, with a school, a newspaper, and eventually even a small opera house. Their first child, a daughter they named Alina after Jasmine's mother, arrived the spring after their wedding. She had Rhett's dark hair and Jasmine's determined spirit, and from her first breath, she wrapped both parents around her tiny fingers. 2 years later, a son joined the family, William, named for Rhett's father, with his mother's auburn hair and his father's serious eyes. Through it all, Rhett and Jasmine built the life they had envisioned that summer evening on the porch, a life of purpose and passion, of hard work and tender moments. They weathered blizzards and drought, economic downturns and personal losses. When Caroline's husband died unexpectedly, leaving her alone with 2 children, they welcomed her to Wyoming for an extended stay that gradually became permanent. The nightmares that had once plagued Rhett grew less frequent, though they never disappeared entirely. On the difficult nights, Jasmine would hold him close, reminding him of where he was, who he was now, not just a survivor of past horrors, but a man who had created something good and lasting. "You're doing better than you think," she would whisper, echoing those first words that had pulled him back from the edge of violence. And he would believe her, because she had never lied to him. By the time Wyoming achieved statehood in 1890, the Evans Ranch had grown to over 2,000 acres, with a herd of cattle alongside the horses Rhett raised with such care. The Prairie Dog Saloon, still under Jasmine's management though now run day to day by trusted employees, had evolved into a respectable establishment that included a small hotel catering to business travelers. Alina, at 18, had just returned from a year at school in Denver. Full of ideas about women's suffrage and equal rights causes Wyoming had embraced earlier than most territories. William, 16 and tall like his father, showed a gift for mathematics and engineering that suggested his future might lie beyond the ranch. One evening in late summer, Rhett sat on the wide porch of the home they had built on the ranch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. Jasmine joined him, settling into the chair beside his, her hand automatically reaching for his. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, noticing his contemplative expression. "I was thinking about time," he replied. "How fast it goes. Alina talking about college, William not far behind her. They're growing up," she agreed, "but that's as it should be, I know." He squeezed her hand. "I was also thinking about the first time I saw you, standing behind that bar in the Prairie Dog, looking like you could handle anything that came your way." She smiled. "I was terrified, actually. Uncle James had been dead less than a month, and half the town was betting I'd sell out or fail within the year. You proved them wrong." "We proved them wrong," she corrected. "I couldn't have done it without you, Rhett. Not just the business, but—" She gestured broadly, encompassing their home, their land, their life together. "All of this. That night at the poker table," he said slowly. "When I lost my temper, when you said I was doing better than I thought, did you know even then what we could be to each other?" Jasmine's eyes, still bright and clear despite the years, met his. "I knew you were a man worth saving," she said. "I knew I couldn't look away. The rest," she smiled, "the rest was a leap of faith." "Best leap I ever took," he murmured, bringing her hand to his lips. From inside the house came the sound of their children's voices, William's deep tones and Alina's lighter cadence, raised in good-natured argument over some book they were discussing. The dinner bell would ring soon, calling them all together around the table that Rhett had crafted with his own hands the year Alina was born. "I love you," Rhett said suddenly, fervently. 20 years, and I still don't say it enough." "You show it every day," Jasmine replied, leaning over to kiss him softly. in everything you do. As darkness settled over the land they had nurtured together, Rhett Evans reflected on the journey that had brought him here from a devastated Virginia to the vastness of Wyoming, from a man bent on self-destruction to one surrounded by love and purpose. All because a strong-willed woman had seen beyond his anger to the wounded heart beneath, had believed he could be more than his past, had told him he was doing better than he thought. And in the end, she had been right.